Welcome to week 4, day 17 of the Web Technologies course. And today we're going to be spending time on tables and forms. So to get started here with tables, let's take a look at what kind of tables look like a little bit here, I guess, before we get started. So basically, here's a product table. And we're going to get into the specifics of what we need to do to create these different tables. So here's kind of like a product table, inventory table. Here's kind of discusses like a large set. Like if you had sometimes on tables you might have multiple columns. You might have 20 columns wide, and so sometimes you have to be able to do some scrolling, and so we're going to look at that. And I have some other examples to look at as well, and we're going to spend some time on W3 schools as well to kind of help you out on the different tags and so forth. So in web development, a table is not just a tool for displaying data. It's a powerful resource for organizing and presenting information in a structured and comparable way. So think of it as a spreadsheet. We use tables to compare data, such as product features and prices, or to outline a topic with multiple related data points, like a schedule or a list of countries and their capitals. And the key purpose is to create a clear, logical relationship between the different pieces of data. Core components of a table. So it's all about the terminology here. A table is made up of 5 main components. Okay, there's other components as well, but the 5 main ones is you have rows. Okay, and for a row, a TR is a row. That's the tag for a row, TR. Actually doesn't really mention the most important one here is really the table tag. Everything in the table is going to be within a table tag, a begin table tag and an end table tag. Okay, but a row is a TR tag, a column. Okay, a column's basically a column of data, right? You also have what's called a cell. And then you'll also have what's called a header cell and a data cell, two different kinds. A header cell will be a TH tag, and a data cell will be a TD tag. Okay, and all of these tags will be within a begin and end table tag. Okay, so TD stands for table data. Okay, a TR is table row. And so here is a simplistic table. So you got the begin table and the end table tag. And in this case, you've got 2 table rows, right? There's one table row, and here's another row. Inside of that, you've got table data, okay? And so this table data is basically going to be row 1, cell 1, and row 1, cell 2, okay? And so let's look at W3 schools here. So here's basically your table data tag. And in this case, they've got an example. Here you got an example where you're actually using what's called a TH tag, and that's a header tag. Okay. So here you got a table row, and so these are going to be headers. Okay. We'll go ahead and try this yourself and look at it. So you got one header of month and one of savings. Okay. And then here you've got your real data, right? This is for your header, and this is for your real data here. Okay, you got the TD tag. Whenever you see TDAG, you're going to think that's a cell, and it's always going to be a cell of data, right? It's going to be that's where your data is really going to be. Whenever you see a TD tag, think this is my data, right? So let's just go ahead and take a look at that. And so here you can see you've got a month. Okay, and you got savings. Got a little bit of styling here, just a border around this table. Okay, but then here's the table itself. Just like we were looking at, here's got another one where you got a February, right? So, but you can see that this here, even though solid black, even though you didn't say bold this, you know, it is bolded because it's a table heading. So you got month and savings. And there's your table data right here for the month and here. So you've got 2 rows and 2 columns, right? 2 rows of data and you have 2 columns and you just have table heading at the top. Let's look at a little bit more here. So I would spend some time coming out here and looking at this, kind of get down the definition so you're not getting confused, because there's quite a handful of different tags here to use. So an HTML tag consists of one table. So always remember everything's going to be in a beginning and end table tag. And then elements and one or more table rows, table headings, and TD elements, right? All of those are going to be in there. Okay. Now there are others as well, and we're going to look at them as well. A TR is a table row, like we already mentioned. The TH elements define a table header, and the TD tags elements define the table cell. Okay, let's look at some examples here. So we already kind of looked at that one. Yeah, this is showing a little bit of floating. This is just kind of showing you, okay, here, I do want to show you this because this is kind of important here. So let's try this. So by default, if you didn't have this, and then we're going to click run here. So what happens here with a border, the border is going to be associated with like each table heading and each table data. And so it's going to be kind of like doubled up, right? And to some people, you may want it to look that way, but it's usually, for most people, in most situations, it's probably a little cleaner to what's called collapsing the border. Okay, and that's what I got rid of that row in the I got rid of that style there, just to show you that. Okay, so this is without collapsing it. If I hit run here now, to collapse it, looks a little cleaner, right? So that's what this does. This will go ahead and collapse that, so it's a little bit more of a cleaner look, right? Okay, let's go back here. Okay, this is just, this is a little bit of CSS. CSS always obviously helps with everything. So here you're right aligning a table, right? So, you have some text here, and then you're right aligning the table. Okay, so even though the table's here, by you right aligning it, it's going to actually put it on the opposite side of this P tag, right? So here's your text here. That's your P tag here, and it's aligned. It's floating right the table to the right hand side of that. This is one way to do it. Obviously, you can use something like a grid as well. So there's other options, but this is just this example here. Okay, let's see what else they have here. How to center a table. Okay. And obviously adding a background color to a table. Let's see what else we have here. Okay, the next thing I want to kind of show here a little bit is a caption. And this is what a caption looks like. So here the caption element is, this is an H1 tag. The caption element is monthly savings, so it's going to put that at the top of the table. The thing about the caption is you need to make sure, so you're actually associating that with a table, right? So you move the table somewhere, it's going to move with that table, right? Obviously, you got an H1 tag. You got this H1 tag. It's not going to move with the table. But with the caption, basically, it's part of the table. Okay, it's part of the table. So you want to make sure that you include that within the begin and end of your table tags. So like I said, if you move that table, it's going to also move with that, right? Okay, let's see what else we want to look at here. More than one row, okay? Let's look at this a little bit. So you can also do a column span, okay? And so then, because like some fields will take up more than maybe one column, right? Something larger, email addresses, you know. This one's probably not relevant because actually probably the email address or a name is going to be take up much more space than a phone number, but that's okay. That's what they have here. So let's just go ahead and take a look at that. And so in this case, let's see what we're doing here. I think what it's telling you. Okay, so yeah, so for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, yeah, so this whole one here is taking up the whole phone number is taking up. So like this is phone number 1 and this is phone number 2. That's kind of what they're doing here. Okay, but this whole TH, your heading is taking up 2, right? It's taking up two columns for the heading, right? Kind of probably not the best kind of an example here, but it's just showing you that by using row span 2, it's that this heading's taking up 2 columns. Okay, this is actually expanding based on the size of the field. But sometimes you want to lock things down a little differently, or you may want to have something that you have two different things within a one section as well, within one column. But yeah, don't think that was the best example there. All right, let's look at a couple other things here, and we're going to go through all these tags again here. Let's see here. Border size. I really want this T head. So we looked at the kind of the TH tags, right? But really originally, some years ago, they didn't have like a T head tape, a T head, right? You just created a new row. Now this T head is optional, but it does provide benefit, especially for those assistive readers. Like if someone is visually impaired or stuff, it breaks things up. It helps reading things, and also for search engine optimization, the same thing. It kind of gives a little more structure to the table, so it makes it easier for classification of that. And more importantly, I think really is the assist as far as from a accessibility type thing for someone who's visually impaired. You got those screen readers. It knows how to handle these things, right? It helps, right? So here you've got a T head tag, right? And then the others is what we already seen earlier, right? We had that month and savings. We just did not have a T head tag before, right? Then here having a T body tag. So this is kind of the T body. This is the basically the content of your table. All your data, right? Is your T body tag, and then under there is a T foot. So that's your footer tag. Kind of similar to what we've done in the HTML when we have your header tag and your footer tag. And usually you have like a main tag, right? Your main tag can be kind of thought of a body tag or a main tag, but so very similar, right? one thing I did want to show you that's kind of interesting how this kind of works here is so here you've got your T head tag. So even though you see this T footer tag here, and this T footer tag is the summer, and this is a good use of a footer tag. It's when you maybe have a bunch of rows and you want to sum up those rows, add everything together or whatever, right? And so that you can have a sum at the end or total, maybe like total or whatever, right? So that's a good use to that. And sometimes maybe there's just some additional little footer information that you want to supply at the bottom of that table. And so there's benefit in that as well. But one thing I did want to kind of show you is you would think, so if I'm going to take this, I'm going to get rid of this. Yeah, let me just cut that out of there. And right up here after the T head table, I'm going to put it right there. So you see this here and you would think, wow, well, you put that there, so this is going to end up being up here. But the way the browser interprets this, okay, the way the browser, hopefully this is going to work because I don't know what kind of things W3 Schools does with this, but I think we're going to be good. So, but even though I move this footer up here, okay, it's still going to should put this still at the end of the thing because the browser's going to read that footer tag and it says, okay, I got a T foot tag. I need to put that at the end of the table. The same with the T head tag needs to be at the top of the table and the T foot should be at the bottom of the table. So I'm going to go ahead and run here and hopefully we still should see some down here just like we did before. And so I click run and here, let's just change the number here just so we can make sure that it actually ran. We're going to change that to 190. And then as you can see, so so basically you can put it in either spot. You don't have to necessarily, and some people do that. They'll have a T head table up here, then their T footer tag, and then they have all their body information, right? And it just knows that the browser will know to put that in the right spot, okay? So just want to point that out. Okay. So a little definition, a T-head tag is used to group the header content. And if you have that, you must have one or more TR tags inside of that. The T-head tag must be used in the following context: as a child of the table element, after any caption, and column group elements. Actually, just for the heck of it, I want to see what this really does if I move that. So I haven't done this before. Usually I kind of follow the T-head table, just kind of like what it has here. But I'm thinking that it's actually going to do the same thing here. And I'm going to move that down under the T-body tag. I'm just going to put anything in here just to see. So I put the T-body tag here, then the T-head tag. Let's go hit run. See if the TH tags what's that going to do? And sure enough, the browser went ahead and took this table. And actually, because this is a T-head tag, it knew that this needs to be before the T-body tag. And when it created it, it went ahead and did that. Obviously, you really don't want to do that. I just wanted to make a point about how that kind of works and how the browser handles those things. Okay. Let's see. So that was T-head. We looked at the T-footer tag. All right. All right, so here's a basic table. We kind of already looked at that. Defining a table border. And once again, do want to kind of mention about the border collapse. And here's kind of a scenario here. We can kind of take another look at that real quick. So here's a different table. And so here's a large data set with scrolling. And we'll show you the scrolling here in a minute. but I'm going to go ahead and change. Which one is this? This is the demo one. So let's find. Looking for that border. Probably just need to search for it here. Make my life a little easier. I'm just going to search for collapse, I think. So right here, and I think it's for all these tables in this document here, I believe that this style table is relevant to all that. So just for right now, I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to hit save here. And as kind of, you might not have been able to see that real good, but you know, it does have, like I said, when you've got the border, if you don't do the collapse, it's going to put a border around the data cell. Like in this case, this one is going to have a border, and then this one's going to have a border. So you kind of like have a double border. Each one of these is having its own little border, right? And so when you got them next to each other, you're going to see it kind of doubled up a little bit, right? And here's another example, same thing. Now if I go ahead and put that back, I think I have autosave, so it's going to automatically update. And I put that back. And maybe it's not updating. I'll hit save. No, maybe I don't have that. Autosave. Oh, autosave. All right. So there, went ahead and got rid of that border again. Next thing I want to kind of show you here is, let's see. That's border collapse. So here's the scrolling. So as you can kind of notice here, if I make this big, this large data, this is just saying large data set. Not really. It's not really large data. So you did, like, if you, let's just, pretend, imagine you had 20 different columns here, right? So you're not going to be able to, you don't want to have this taking up that, you want it to fit on your screen. So one way to do it is actually using, kind of what's called a horizontal, it's called overflow here, okay? So once it reached a certain length and it didn't fit, it automatically put a horizontal scroll bar, okay? So to see that, let's go take a look at that real quick. I think I can just search for offset for that. Oh no, overflow. So this is that responsive table container. That's this one here. And this is where the scroll bar is. If I get rid of this, if I just get rid of that, it's not going to scroll anymore, right? It's not scrolling anymore. If I put it back the way it was, now it's scrolling. X is for horizontal. Y is going to be for vertical, right? But you'd have to get this page to an extent where it can't, you'd have to really get this where you don't have a lot there. Oh well. So that didn't quite work like I wanted to, but that's okay. But so basically, the flow is that. So in this case, flow for X is auto, overflow X auto, and that will do your horizontal one. Okay. All right. Let's see here. What else? So we already looked at that. We looked at caption. Make sure you keep the caption within your table. So if you move your table on your screen, whatever, it's going to stay with the table itself. It belongs to the table. So one thing I just really wanted to go through is kind of the misuse of tables, especially years ago. And so, you know, you know, specification changes and the HTML specifications, later versions of the HTML, and, you know, CSS for that matter as well, them together really helped to correct kind of this misuse. And so, how we actually used to do things a long time ago is especially for like if you had a, let's just say you had an HTML document where you had a header and a footer, right? And you had maybe your navigation, you had some content, you had things, different things on different things. Instead of we, you know, we didn't have the T head, we didn't have the header tags, the HTML header tags, and the footer tags. They didn't exist 20 years ago, right? So you had just like a bunch of divs. You had usually paragraphs and divs all over your HTML code, and you used to use we did use some JavaScript to float this to the left, float this to the right, things like that. And also with tables, tables became kind of a way to format your page, right? You know, you could create a table, and then on the you know the left side is going to be your navigation, maybe the top is your header, and we ended up using tables a lot. You know, that was very commonly used. It wasn't the purpose of tables, but we didn't have a lot of options back then. But with, you know, newer versions of HTML and also with CSS, you can do a lot more where you don't, you know, you can could readjust things without having to stick them in a table, right? So let's see if it had an example here. Maybe it's in this other document. I had it somewhere. Okay, yeah. So incorrect misuse. So kind of like using a table to, here's your sidebar, here's your main content, using the TR and TD tags to drop other content inside of there. Maybe divs within the table data, right? And so that was kind of a misuse. You know, that's how we, that was the best thing and easiest thing to do, and it kind of grew with the page as the page got smaller. It kind of actually worked in a lot of ways for us, right? But it was really not the intended use of a table. So the intended really use of a table is to use it for table data. Okay. Um, so so screen readers will interpret the page as a series of data cells, creating confusing and illogical experience for users with visual impairments and stuff. Yeah. Maintenance, flexibility, performance. You know, it had it was not the best use. So with the rise of CSS for layouts, such as you know, doing a float, Flexbox, which we haven't talked about yet. We did look at grids a little bit. We'll spend more time looking at grids in the future. Also Flexbox. These things you can actually move, you know, kind of set things up on your screen, so you don't have to use tables for your layout, right? So when to use a table? So kind of the general rule um, is, you know, use a table for tabular data, right? So a table is useful and appropriate only when information you are presenting is best understood in like a grid format with rows and columns. You know, like products, you know, model numbers, prices, where they all associate with each other, right? You know, like let's just say electronics. And so, you know, you've got, you know, a different kind, you know, or, you know, let's just say something more specifically like headphones or something, right? Headphones. So here's the model, here's the, you know, here's the model, here's the company, here's the features, here's the price, and those can all be within kind of a tabular data and within a table itself, right? For comparison purposes. So here it says, you know, tables are incredibly useful for things like pricing lists, sports statistics, schedules and calendars, product comparisons, financial data, right? Not for layout, right? Don't want to use it for layout anymore. So planning and creating effective tables. Creating a good table isn't about the code. It requires careful planning. identifying what the data is, right? Determining the structure, how many columns, how many rows is needed. Obviously, you got to write the markup. You know, the table, the TR, the TH, the TD tags, and you really should, even though it's optional, the T foot tags and the T foot and the T head, T body tags. You know, even though them are optional, you really should use them because they're very important for those for accessibility and for as like for SOE, this search engine optimization. When like Google and the different other companies, they scan all the pages, right? All pages on the internet are constantly being scanned, and that's how they um, determine how high you rank. And for search engine optimization, when you use the correct tags and all that, it's going to help with ranking of a web page. Okay. Um, you know, Add a caption, provide a clear title using your caption. Make sure that's within your table tag. Styles and CSS, and obviously you want to add styles and CSS to make it more visually appealing. Um, so you must consider, the modern web's biggest challenge is, you got mobile devices, you got tablets, you've got desktops, right? So a well-designed desktop table can look terrible on a small phone. A table that is 800 pixels wide simply won't fit on a 320 pixel viewport, right? So when planning a table for responsive web design, you must give careful consideration to your mobile viewport. There's several strategies to make tables responsive. Horizontal scroll, which we kind of looked at there, right? Where you got your overflow auto for overflow X. X is for horizontal. This allows the user to scroll horizontally to see the entire table. Stacking for simple tables, you can use CSS to change the layout on mobile. Instead of a grid, you can stack the tables vertically. So perhaps turning each row into a block of information with clear labels. Hiding columns, you can hide non-essential columns, right? So you can do display none on some certain specific columns of your table if it's not as relevant. Maybe there's, maybe on the desktop you want to give lots of information, but on a mobile phone we don't need to give all that. We just need to these three or four things, especially when you've got the tables that have multiple different columns, right? So you can hide those columns by doing display none, right? Um, Data priority, this involves prioritizing which columns are most important and showing them first, then perhaps offering a way to expand to see the rest of the data. Okay. All right. Let's see here what else we have. Guess I kind of showed you this already, but let's see what we got here. So here's just some different, very common thing to do on tables is like alternating rows. Okay, there's easier ways to do that than others. It takes a little work, but CSS at one point in time you couldn't do that with CSS. You had to do do it some other ways. But with CSS, you can do every other row, every other row, it could be the first and third row, or every even or odd. So here you've got I don't know how well you can see it on your screen, but this is kind of a lighter gray color there, the second one, right? So you can do that. That's very useful for reading, especially you've got a table with multiple rows. It's an easy way a lot easier to view it, much more appealing to look at, right? When you alternate the colors like that to see it. And then also doing like a hover where you're like doing this to hover over a different row. It kind of highlights those as well. All right. And it's kind of doing the same for all of those. Let's see. Here's where you got a little more data. So you can see the second and fourth one here. So every even row is highlight it, right? Okay, let me look at the CSS for that real quick here. So this is how this is handling the every other row, right? So this is doing this is the name of the class that's already on there, right? So you're saying find me the style table, okay? And the style table, this is a class that's on the table tag itself, okay? And saying, give me, find me the style table. And then on the T-body tag, so obviously if you don't have a T-body tag, this ain't gonna work, right? You can do something like this, but you may not want to do that. It's best to do it. You don't want to really change those colors, maybe on the TH tags, those. Okay, you really just want to do it on the T body, or the headers or the footers. You really want to just do it on the table body tags, where the real data is, right? So here you got a T body tag. Then you can do a TR tag, and you do nth child even. Okay, so on the even, it's showing every even row, right? Which we kind of just seen. Let's just take another look at that real quick here. So every even. Now, if I change this to odd here, let's go take a look at that. And now you notice the first one is got the kind of the grayish color in the third one. So that's how you handle that. You change the background color based on odd or even. Here's the hover. You're doing a hover. Remember we did the pseudo classes with the colon. You're doing the same thing, right? But you're just kind of having a chained styling here, where first you're finding the table that has the class styled table, and I think all of them do on this. And then you're saying, give me the T body tag, and then look for the TR and do the nth child, either odd or even. Okay. There's other options here as well, but these are the most common. So here was the odd, and then I'm going to change it to even, and we're back to how we were. Okay. So that's how you can do that. All right, the next thing, I want to kind of do a quick review, because I know it's a lot on the table stuff. So just to review kind of the definitions of the table here, a cell is a fundamental component of the HTML table, represents a single block of data within the table. I don't really like grid because it kind of confuses you with using a grid, and a grid's really not for a table for the most part. It can be, but it can be either a data cell or a header cell, right? We looked at a data cell, which would TD tag, right? Or a header cell, right? Would be a TH tag. TH tag for header, TD for table data, table header, TH, right? A column is a vertical group of cells within a table. And you can also do what's called a column element, is used to define attributes for one or more columns in a table. I will be doing a separate, video, kind of helper video. We have a couple homework assignments. One's going to be on tables. One's going to be on forms. Homework. So there'll be two different homework assignments for chapter 8, one on tables and one on forms. And I'll do a helper video on each of one of those, and I'll go through a few more little concepts there. Okay. Data cell. So just basically a little redundant. For a data cell, you're using a TD tag, right? For a header cell, you're using the TH tag, right? A row is a horizontal group of cells within a table, and it is defined by the TR tag, which is what? Table row, right? Table row. So, best to memorize those so you don't get confused. TD, table data. TH, table heading. TR, table row, right? And obviously the table, that's the HTML element that organizes the data into rows and columns. It's created using the table tag. So make sure that you always have um, all of your other tags related to a table within the begin and end table tag. Table border is a line that surrounds the cells, rows and columns of each stone table. So yeah, years ago table had a attribute on it for a border, but with CSS now, best just to use CSS for that. So just use the CSS for your table, and that defines your borders. Um, okay, table caption. That's a brief title or description for the HTML table, and you're going to put that at the top generally, right? That should be at the top of your table, and make sure that's also within your table tag. And then here's your table header. The top rows or first columns of a table that contain header cells provide a descriptive title for your data. Below or to the side. Okay. And so one of the table homework assignments going to have you do something maybe a little different, where you're going to have some things on the both on the top and the left. So like I said, I'm going to do a helper video on that to make that easier for you and explain some of those concepts. Okay, so that is all I'm going to discuss right now today on the tables. So we're going to go ahead and look at forms here next. So just to show you a quick example here, created this Bella Vista restaurant, just a authentic Italian cuisine, and having both a table. Here's a table, kind of the same thing, we all looked at, right? So this is, if you recall, for a table, when you hover, this is using that hover, right? One of those pseudo classes, :hover. So when you hover over a row, it's going to highlight that. And then it's also using that, that nth for the even and odd that we just kind of looked at. So the even, this is using the even rows, right? So even rows is going to be the grayish color here, right? So that's the table. Here is some basically some groupings for a form, right? Here you got a full name, email address, phone number. Here you can enter a date. Here's a preferred time, party size, seating preference, and then under here you got some special request. Okay. And here you've got what's called a check boxes, right? And check boxes are different than radio buttons. Check boxes allow you to do one or more, where radio buttons you can only select one, right? Check boxes you can select multiple, right? All right. And we'll look at this again in a little bit, but just kind of want to show you about a form. Forms can look different, right? All depends on their purpose and their need. And how you want it to display, right? Okay. So let's talk about forms. Forms are the gateway for users to interact with a website, from submitting feedback to placing an order. We'll cover how to create them, what components they contain, and how to make them look good using CSS. So what kind of information is collected on forms? Forms are used to collect a wide variety of data from users. This information could be anything from basic contact details to complex preferences. Common types of information include personal information, name, address, email, etc. Account information, username, password, and security questions. Payment information such as credit card numbers, expiration date, billing address, feedback and surveys, ratings, comments, suggestions, selections and choices. So that's when we're usually using the check boxes and radio buttons, right? So some product options, maybe you're buying something, what size, what color, subscription preferences, etc. Right? And also you can do what's file uploads as well, right? I'm sure you've done that before on a website where you click something for a file upload, right? And upload a resume, a photo, a document, right? So it can also be done with forms. The use of forms in business. Forms are a critical tool for businesses and organizations. They facilitate key processes, including e-commerce, collecting shipping and payment information for online purchases, customer service, providing way for users to contact support. Right, you fill out a form for contact. I have this problem. You know, you fill everything out and then you click submit. Right, to report issues, provide feedback. That's also a huge use of forms. Lead generation, capturing contact information for sales and marketing purposes. User authentication, allowing users to log in. That's probably what we've used forms for the most. And you know, you probably don't realize there's a form behind that, but when you put in your username and password, click submit, right? That's actually a form submission. Data collection, conducting market research and through surveys and questionnaires. So purposes of input controls and labels. Input controls, these are interactive elements within a form, such as text boxes, check boxes, buttons, okay, and others as well. Their purpose is to capture user input. Each control is designed to collect a specific type of data. Labels, okay. Labels are text descriptions associated with an input control. Their purpose is to provide a clear and accessible explanation of what the information the user should enter into the corresponding control. Labels are crucial for usability and accessibility, especially for users with visual impairments who rely on screen readers. Okay. One thing I'll point out, and we're going to look at this here in a little bit as well. This label here has a 4. There's this special kind of tag, a 4 tag, right? And this 4 tag has this name. Well, the way that this label is associated with this input field, okay, is because this 4 tag name is associated with the ID, okay? So the way to make sure that this label is associated, very important, especially for these screen readers, because it's just because you've got a label before it, it's not going to know. You need to what's called bind it, and what this 4 does is this binds this radio button to this label, okay, or vice versa. This label, it binds this label right here to this radio button by using this name, and this name in the 4 has to be the same as the ID in the input type, okay, the form control. So there's different types of form controls. There's text boxes for just a single text input, like your name or your address. There's a password box, special one just for passwords. That's way it's sensitive for text input. It's masked. I'm sure most of the time you entered passwords, you can't see it. Sometimes they have a little thing you can click to show password, but most of the time it's going to be masked. And so you kind of wonder, you know, if you're just sitting at home, it's not a big deal, right? Most of the time. But, you know, if you're in an office, you're in or you're using a library computer, you know, or you're in a place where there's a lot of people around, right? A coffee shop or whatever, you know, when you enter a password, you don't want people looking over your shoulder to see your username and password. Usually your username, they're going to be able to see that when you enter that, but the password is masked so that you can't see that. That's probably really the purpose of that, is so somebody isn't looking over your shoulder and seeing what your password is, right? Stealing your password. So they can very easily get your username. If they can get your password, then they can go ahead and log in as you, right? So that's the kind of the purpose of that, the masking. When you're home by yourself, you know, you probably don't, not really an issue, you know, but usually when you're somewhere, especially somewhere public or whatever, it's very important. Checkbox. A checkbox allows users to select one or more options. Remember that? Always remember that. Checkbox is for more than one option. A radio button allows users to select only one option from a mutually exclusive group. Okay, so it's like contact me. My preferred way of contact is by email or by phone or whatever, right? You select just one, what's preferred. A select a list dropdown provides a compact way to users to choose one option from a list. Text area for multi-line text input, comments, feedback. You can use a text area for comments, and it can grow. And especially nowadays, the HTML form controls are a lot more interactive and much more customizable to be able to do a lot of things with. Right. Long time ago, you just had a text box and a text area, and you could just say I want it this size, and that was it. You could get a scroll bar, but now they're much more interactive and customizable. File upload allows the user to upload a file. Buttons use buttons for submitting a form, resetting the form, or other actions. So let's go ahead and look at a little bit here. Let's go to, let's start out here in W3 Schools. And I know I've mentioned this before, but for the most part, W3 Schools does do pretty well. But they're really not the official, and maybe in some areas they may have a little bit of stuff that's a little bit outdated. Okay, yeah, have some stuff that's outdated, and maybe even incorrect too. Really, the official source is the Mozilla, right? We've looked at that. The developer Mozilla early on. That's the more official type source. W3 Schools, just simpler kind of to use, and especially when you're new, just a simpler way to use it. Okay, so that's kind of why I always point to that. So here we've got a basic first name, last name. Okay, and this is a text box, right? And it's got a submit here. Let's go ahead and look at that. So once again, I'm going to point out here. So for a form, you always want to have your form tag, right? Everything needs to be within your form tag. Just like we talked about tables, everything for your table rows, your table data needs to be within the table tag. Same thing with forms. All of your form controls, all your labels, everything else needs to be within, and your submit as well, needs to be within a form tag. Okay. Now, I want to point out once again here, and I just did a minute ago, is for your label. Your label needs to be binded to your input, right? And in this case, you've got F name standing, short for the first name. Obviously, this is whatever name you're giving it, right? This is a developer, this is whatever you decide, right? But here they're using F name for first name, and so the for here is associated with this ID. Okay, so and then this one here, L name, is associated with this control. Okay, and this binds those together. Okay. Here, also so some of the common things for an input tag, you're always going to have a type, an ID, generally a name. You don't have to have an ID, but you should. You should always have a label. And so if you have a label, you're going to need an ID. Then you're going to have a name and a value. Okay, the name's important. The ID is important for binding this. Also for accessing this, maybe with CSS. And also when we start getting into JavaScript, it's very helpful with JavaScript because you can add some additional functionality. But the ID is more or less for that page. That name is important when you submit a form. Okay, when you submit a form, what gets submitted is not your ID. It's going to be a name. It's going to be name value pairs. Okay, so for this, the name is going to be and I'll show you an example here in a little bit. But the name is going to be submitted to, in the most case, to a back end. We don't have a back end, right? But we're going to still kind of, assimilate a back end, but we really won't have one, right? But it's all about name value pairs, and in this case, it's John, right? By value. But if you go in here and change your name, and I'm going to put my name in here. And so even though here, behind the scenes, this doesn't change, right? In the code itself, this doesn't change. But in reality, in memory, in the browser memory, F name, this, and right, this is equal to this now. Even though you're seeing John, in the browser memory, this is Jim, okay? And I don't know, I haven't clicked this. I don't know what this is going to do. I guess they have something set up here, so let's just click this and see what happens. I'm going to click submit, and then, so, you know, they have a little thing that runs on a back-end server somewhere, and they're just, you know, saying, hey, it was submitted, and here's your F name, you know, your first name and your last name, right? So this is what gets passed, okay? This is what gets passed to that back-end service, right? And then, like I said, it's Jim instead of John, okay? So this is just basically what's called a default value, okay? This is a default value. All right. Let's see here. So that's the form element. So remember, the form element is a container for different type of input elements, such as text fields, check boxes, radio buttons, submit buttons. The input element is the most used form element. And you have different types here. You have an input type of text. That's what we just looked at, where we had the first and last name. And we looked at these other ones as well. We looked at a checkbox, and we looked at a radio button, right? Remember, a radio button displays a radio button for selecting one of many choices, right? So you only select one with a radio button. With a checkbox, you can select one or more. And then here's displays a submit button for submitting a form. And, you know, maybe sometimes you might have some other button for not submitting the form for some other functions as well. But, you know, you can also just do a input type of a button here. I do want to mention, and we're going to look at this here in a little bit as well, kind of the way the specification, HTML specifications evolved. And in a way, this is kind of a little bit outdated. Okay, this input type submit, input type button. I think they're suggesting there is a button one now that starts with, instead of input here, it just starts with button, right? And that's kind of like, sometimes, you know, when you're in Visual Studio Code, you see the little red lines, and sometimes it's not a big deal, right? And that's because that's using, it's using one of those extensions. It's the HTML validate one. And so sometimes if you have blank spaces in there, you see the little red squigglies. But if you're also using input type or submit or button, it's also going to flag those and show those as, you know, from its perspective, it's really more of a warning, but it's kind of showing them as errors because it's red. But it's making a suggestion that you really should use a button as opposed to an input type button, okay? Special tag called button, right? We'll look at that here in a minute. And here was that one we just looked at where you, once again, you've got the F name. So this label is bind it to this input because it has this ID, matches the 4. Same thing with the last name. And we already looked at that one. Okay. And a label, you know, I already mentioned it, you know, important for the screen readers. So accessibility is very important. And some places, actually, the government has certain laws. There's certain laws that they have to be, you know, if they haven't already, if it isn't accessible, they have to actually have an action plan to make it accessible to everyone. Okay. It's kind of, you know, based on, you know, it's kind of a discrimination thing. You have to make sure that, you know, everyone can access your site, right? You can't only allow certain people to be able to access things, especially for government-related stuff, government-related websites. Okay, radio buttons. So let's just take a look at this. Why not? We're here. So here's choose your favorite language. And the same thing here so far, HTML. So the same thing here. You're binding HTML to this, right? Now, one thing that's kind of a problem here, no radio button. Okay, this is fine. So your name, what you really want to do here on a name, you want this to be, a lot of times, you know, you're used to seeing unique names, okay? Um, but in this case, for a radio button, you're only choosing one, right? So when you send this to a back-end server, you want to kind of have the same name, right? So each one of these should just be the same name because you only can select one. And then when it gets back to the back-end server, it's going to say fave language, and it's going to be either HTML or CSS, okay, or JavaScript. It'll be whatever when you select it, right? Okay. Now for checkboxes, that's a little different because you can choose multiple, right? So they really want it, you need those to be unique, the name's unique for checkboxes because they can select multiple, right? All right. Let's see what else here. Checkboxes, so let's look at this. And this is a situation where you've got a checkbox. Once again, you're binding vehicle 1 to vehicle 1, right? Vehicle 2 to vehicle 2, etc. And as you can see here, the name is going to be unique because you can choose multiple, okay? You can choose multiple. So you have to be prepared for that on your back end that you may, you know, choose multiple, right? But for a radio button, you can have them the same name because you're only going to be sending one to the back end, right? Let's see what happens when we hit submit here. Okay, so it's showing you, right? So just for fun here, let's just do this. Let's just change this all to 1 here. And then if I choose all of these and hit submit, vehicle 1 equals bike, vehicle 1 equals car, and vehicle 1 equals boat. So this is probably going to cause you a problem. Depends on how your back end's handled, but you know, basically in a lot of cases it's just going to overwrite, and then your back end it's going to say vehicle 1 equals boat, and that's going to be your only one, right? So you really want this to be unique. All right. Submit button. So we already kind of just looked at a submit button earlier where it hits your submit here. Type submit, so whenever you have a submit button, so make sure that you know you're doing everything with the correct case, right? If you don't have things, let's see what happens here. Sometimes things will actually work even though it says it. Let me change my name. It did work anyhow. I'm going to try this one more time. I'm going to run this. I just want to make sure. Yeah. And I don't know if this is always the case, and I don't know how W3 Schools handles this. Maybe they have a wrapper, but you know, obviously, if this is something different than a submit button, let's see what happens on that, right? Here we called it something different. Here, maybe I better do it this way too. And I don't know how this run thing works. So that's wrong. Okay, and now, yeah, well, here it won't even show that button, right? Because it doesn't know it's a submit button. It's just doing this as by default. Looks like it's defaulting to a text box, right? It's defaulting to a text box, right? So it's important that you, and I'll check on that. I don't remember. I thought it was case sensitive, but obviously, you know, if you don't have it correct, So that works fine. It's this. The type is important, which makes sense, right? You're saying this is a type text. This is a type submit. If it doesn't match type submit, then it's not going to show that, right? Lowercase is fine though. Okay, even though that was changed, that don't matter. This is just value. This is just for you to view, right? So, all right. Name attribute. Yeah. Yeah. So this example will not submit, right? Because we already said before what gets submitted when you submit a form. What gets submitted to the back end is a name and a value, right? A name and a value. The ID is irrelevant for a form submission. It's only for you for like I said, binding your labels, and also for maybe doing some special customized styling on it. And also, I think I mentioned like within JavaScript, it's also a good way to use that with JavaScript, which we're not worried about right now. But that's what the ID for. The IDs for developers and development, where the names are actually in the situation for forms is very important for submitting your forms, right, to the backend service. All right. So there's also this action attribute that's on the form. And this tells you what to call, right? What to call. And, for us, we don't really have a back-end service to access. But here within W3 schools, they do. Okay. So, but, this is what is getting called. So in this case, this is a relative path. That's going to be relative to, it's going to be relative. They have some special ones that run in their domain, right? So that's how this is actually running. But so this is what you're going to do if you actually did have a backend service running. You would go ahead and have your action point to wherever your backend service is. Okay. Yeah, so another one that's really important here. Labels, we've seen that. So let's look at a select element. Select element's important. So here you have what's called a select element, where basically a drop-down menu, right? And for your select, you've got your ID of cars, and we know that when you submit a form, backend doesn't care about that, doesn't get passed. What gets passed is cars, which is your name, right? Is the attribute name. So it's going to pass cars, and then it's going to pass the value. And here it's got like different options. It's based on once you select something, it's going to set a value for this cars, right? It's going to set a value for cars when you make a change here. If I hit submit here, submitted form data, your input was received, cars equal fiat, right? So that's how that works. And once again, here you need to make sure that you have your options within your select. You always have a name, and you always have a value here, right? Because you're not passing this. This is for display reasons, right? All of these on the left here are for display reasons. What you're actually passing to the backend service is your name, which is cars equals the value here, right? You can't change the value of it, right? You can't change the value of it. Like on a text box, we've seen the default values where it had Joe or whatever it had, or John Doe, I guess it was John Doe or whatever, and I changed it to Jim. So that actually changes your default value. But here with selects, you can't change the default value. basically whatever you select, this is the value it's going to set for that. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, this is also there's the idea of select it, right? And so what happens here is you got the Volvo. By default, you come in. It's not going to be. Let me run this. It's going to just default to the first one in the list here, right? Sometimes people put in blank ones, right? You could put a first one being kind of a blank one, right? That way it would default to blank. Sometimes you want it to default to the first one in the list. In this case, you're defaulting to the first one in the list, which is Volvo, right? But usually when you got the selected stuff, usually that's when I'm sure you've used a form before where it got saved somewhere, and then when, maybe preferences for something, right? And so, that gets saved somewhere, some database, right? You call some backend service, that just happened, without you knowing when you hit submit. And then, later on you want to change your preferences or update your passwords, update this or that, And so it went and called that stuff, and that stuff comes back to your front end, right? Well, it comes back to your front end. So this could be a case where your front end would automatically, some logic that's running on the back end saying, oh, this was a fiat, so let's go ahead and pass back that this one was the selected one, right? And so then there's that. Because, most of the case you wouldn't want to do this, and just from a front end without that already being selected for some reason or another, right? Obviously, there's some stuff in JavaScript where you could click one thing and it's going to select something to something else. And obviously, we're not at that point yet in this course for that, but just kind of wanted to point that out. So a lot of times this selected stuff is because it got set from something else, right? It decided, oh, this was the one you selected before, kind of thing, right? But this just lets you know that something in a list can be selected by using the selected keyword, just like that. This is kind of a special one. We're always used to doing something where it has an attribute, an equal sign, right? This is kind of a special kind, right? With selected there, okay? And this is called a select statement. Once again, select statement. So where you have select and then you have different options, right? Name value pairs. All right, let's see what's next here. Choose a car. Okay, yeah. So this one, yeah, let's take a look at that. So here, you could have a select box. By putting a size in here, it's going to only show 3. For you to go more, you'll have to scroll down to the 4th one. So let's just change this to 2 to check that out and hit run. Now you've got 2 in that list. You'll have to scroll down for the next 2, right? By using the size, and that size has to be on that select tag, right? On that select tag. All right. Let's see. Okay, yeah, let's look at this one as well. So here it's basically saying size 4, so it's showing you them all, right? It's showing you all of them. But here it has multiple. So let's see how that works. So if I choose that, if you just click on it, that's not going to work. Does it tell you? Okay, that's done. So hold down the control. So for a Windows, Mac's different, Mac, okay? But for Windows, hold down your control key and you can select multiple, right? Same thing if you click it again while you're still holding down your control key, it will unselect it, right? And then obviously if we make this 2 here and then run this again, you can have smaller. So control key, and you'd have to scroll down. Sometimes you could have a list of a whole bunch, right? A very big list where you might have to scroll down, right? Okay. All right. Text areas. Let's look at text areas. So a text area, you can put the rows and columns of your text area. You control how big you want that to be. You know, and it's based on kind of, it's something that you plan for when you're creating your website, creating a web page, whatever. How big of an area you want. Is this something where, you want someone to have some extensive comments, maybe a list of, maybe it's a thing that you have where you're submitting a ticket for a problem you have and you want the steps to reproduce. So you want maybe a significant amount of space for someone to put in steps to reproduce or something, right? So let's just go ahead and look at this. And here you've got 110 by 30, right? But you can change this, you can play with this. So let's make it 50 columns, right? Let's make it smaller on that. Oh, I hit the wrong button. Like the first time. So yeah, let's even make it smaller than that. 2. Let's make it 2. Now the good thing about text areas, they have this little thing that you could grab down here and make them bigger, right? Years ago, you didn't have this. You pretty much had to decide. You pretty much had to just do the rows and columns, and then you had to have like a horizontal scroll so that someone could scroll down or whatever, right? That way, the benefit of that nowadays, obviously, is it'll kind of grow with you, and then so you don't have to worry about that so much. And then if you want to add more, you can take up less space. Sometimes you had to, like I said, either a scroll bar or you had to make them really big all the time so people could see what they're writing in there, right? But nowadays you can kind of change that, right? But by default, you still is what you decided here. So I hit that again, it's going to default to that, okay? So that's your text area. Rows and columns specifies the visible number of lines. Yeah. Okay, here you're showing a little bit. And obviously, where we try to avoid this. This is one thing, like sometimes that, things like W3 schools, and I'm not saying maybe the Mozilla developer one's also the same. I don't know, but usually they're a little better about things. But obviously, we kind of talked about this an inline style, even though we had some assignments saying to do it. And I'm sure, you go work at some employer, especially if they've got some older code bases which haven't been updated. You're probably going to see a lot of inline styles, but it's generally not best. You should use either embed it with, within a style tag within the, kind of the top of your HTML, or have that external one in a separate CSS file, right? So just mentioning that. So yeah, here you're just, instead of doing rows and columns, you're setting this with pixels. There may be some benefit in doing that, depending on different things. All right. Let's see what else we have. Here's a button. Okay, so here they're actually using the button element. Okay, and this was what I was kind of talking about earlier. That especially within the Visual Studio Code, kind of complains about that extension, the HTML validate one, kind of complains about you really should be using the button, suggesting to use the button tags, right? So same thing here. This is showing you. Now, don't worry about this. This is actually kind of almost like an embedded little piece of JavaScript where this is going to use an alert to alert you that you did this. Hello world. Click it. Little button pops up. Hello world. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Which one? Where were we? All right. There's the pixels. There's the button. Field set. Field sets are important. So let's look at a field set. So as you can see, a field set's wrapping around, okay? It's wrapping around a group of inputs and labels associated with them. Also has a legend, right? Okay, it has a legend. The field set has a legend, and then it has other tags as well underneath. Okay, let's go take a look at that. So as you can see here, and here's your legend, right? And the field set will put this kind of like this border all the way around it, right? And so it's a good for grouping common things together for a field, especially let's say you're doing a credit card information for that. Usually you want to kind of wrap that together, right? Especially if you've got a lot of fields on, a lot of form data, a lot of, not form data, but form inputs on the thing. It's, if you got an extensive form, you want to break that up into different sections. So that's very beneficial there. So pretty basic. Obviously, the important thing also is making sure that, you know, you start with a field set. You have to make sure you end that field set, right? And you want to include the legend as well, right? And that's just going to submit it. Okay. All right, let's close off a few of these. Get too many of those. All right, data list. Data list is another option. So a data list element specifies, this is one I haven't used much of, to be honest with you. Element specifies a list of predefined options for input element. Users will see a drop-down list of predefined options as they input data. The list attribute of the input element must refer to the ID attribute of the data list, right? So kind of the same thing here. The list attribute of the input tag, so you have list equals browsers. So how we looked at the binding of a label to a form input control, right? For that, the for had to bind to the ID. In this case, you have to bind, you use a list, and whatever the value of your list is needs to be the ID of your data list. So let's take a look at that. And then when you put it here, it has little options for you to possibly choose, right? It's different than a select because you don't have to put that in there. You can put something else in there as well, right? It's kind of just a suggestion thing, predefined options for an input field, right? And then you start putting in there, it's going to go to that specific one, right? So just for the heck of it, let's see if I do this, I expect that to, yeah. So just because it's not in the list, it will still submit it, right? That's what I expected. But it's just, it's a predefined one just to make it a little simpler for the users to, they may have another option. It's good for something where, genres of music or something, right? Genres of music where you got different ones. Somebody might add something you don't have in your list, right? But, you can have a group of predefined ones for what somebody might enter, but, you might not have them all, right? All right, let's see an output element. Okay, so an output element represents a result of a calculation, like one performed by a script, okay? So obviously this is doing something here. All right. An output element. We'll look at this more when we get into JavaScript. You really don't need to worry about that at this point. And actually, some of these were already things you didn't need to really worry about too much. So that's that. We spent a lot of time on that, I know. Let's see a quick couple other ones that kind of maybe we didn't see there in that list because that was probably the most common ones. You also have like input type. Well, a password, we talked about that. Email's a special one, right? A type. Besides just text, there's also the password, which we know that the characters will be masked for a password. An email address is a text field for email. It includes a built-in validation for email format, which is, these are things that are really nice in later specification versions of HTML. To have special validation that's associated with different things such as password, email. This could be used for telephone numbers, and then a date for a date picker, number stating that, hey, this is a number as opposed to a string, right? A checkbox. We looked at that. Radio button, submit, reset, hidden. A hidden field. A hidden field is one. I do want to mention this one because a hidden field is not. If you know how we kind of like view source. You see me do that a couple times when I'm in a browser. I right click and do view source, or you go into like developer tools and look at some of the content. The hidden field can have a value, and it's still there. It's within the browser. The hidden value is something that you might want to say, have, but you don't necessarily need to show it on the screen. So by it being hidden, it's just not going to show on the screen is what it really means. And it's hidden from the user to see, but if you went and actually viewed the code underneath of it, like either by doing the view source or by using developer tools, it's that the hidden field's actually in there. The data will be in there, the name and value. Okay, frequently used input control attributes. We all looked at we looked at the names, right? We know the name is what gets sent to the backend server. ID attributes, a unique identifier for the element. Very important for linking the labels. And we also seen that special one for the data sets as well. And then also for CSS and JavaScript, right? The ID. So think of the IDs being, used for binding, like I said, the binding the labels, and also for development for us developers, right? But as far as the name is for the back end, right? It's also for developers too, but that's what gets passed to the back end is the name, right? The value, okay, the value is going to be associated with the attribute specifies have initial value, right? It could be just an empty string too. How it shows you here, value. This could be an empty string. You don't necessarily. This is optional too. You don't have to be there at all, right? But this is going to be a default value. And it kind of helps sometimes for users to see, oh, okay, yeah, this is what I want to enter there, right? Let's see here. So we did look at the for text size and max length. So this is also so the value there, a placeholder here for text, a placeholder. We'll look at this later. I'll show you an example of this, not today, but I guess I will show this. I'll show this when I do the helper thing. But placeholder is basically provides a hint about what to put in there. And once you click in there, it'll disappear, right? Max length can be used for the maximum amount of characters that can be allowed to be put into a text field, right? Or the initial size of the text field, right? The size of it on the screen, right? You can control that. Kind of already looked at some of this. You got your password, email, for telephone, and a date for a date picker. Text area, we looked at the rows and columns for that, right? looked at radio controls. We looked at the select box. And you have multiple options in there, right? And each option is going to have a value attribute. That's what gets passed to the back end. Here's a submit control. We're using a submit. And a reset. And I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. So as far as another thing, and just kind of to mention, we looked at that action attribute on that form tag. There's an action attribute. But there's also a method attribute as well. And the method attribute is either a get or a post. A get is actually it puts it all within your browser. Like if you know where you put the, when you go to a website, whatever it is, ESPN.com, you're going to see that up there in the address bar. Well, when you submit a form, it actually goes up into, will actually be passed through the address bar to the back end. Okay, you'll see that in the address bar when you do a get. A post does not do that. And when do you want to use a get or do a post? When you're just like doing something where you're getting something and it's not very confidential and you don't care about it. Whenever you're sending a password, right? Any kind of thing like that, you always want to use a post, but you're going to use, you can't just select certain things to do a post. Your whole form, right? Your whole form, you have two options, either doing a get or do a post. And so you really never want to do that for, if you have a password or something like that, you don't want it to be displayed in the address bar, right? So you always want to do a post, and that's the situation, right? But for us, for what we're doing, we're just doing a lot of front end stuff. We're not going to be sending things to the back end, but just wanted to let you know about that. Obviously, a reset button will reset the page. Let's see here. Different types of input controls. We kind of went through all of those. Labels, yes. Common form attributes, yes. So we talked about the action, and that's basically the URL. It could be a relative URL or an absolute. You remember the difference between that? Relative is relative to basically the domain name where you're at, right? Or, for us, we used relative paths for our folder structure, but also it's also relevant for like a website, that has a domain name, like I said, ESPN.com / and what's after that. So you don't necessarily have to put, if you put ESPN.com, all HTTP : all of that, that's relative, that's an absolute path. But sometimes you can just put a relative path, and if that piece of that back-end service is there, which it should be there as part of your domain, then you just use that relative path, right? As opposed to the fully qualified path, which is basically everything, right? That goes in the action. The method was either a get or a post. Encoding type, we can talk about that later. But so for form data, you really want to do multi-port form data. That could be set. The role of the action attribute, basically it's a back-end service is running, it could be different things. All right. So just to show you for a form, that's how you do a get. This is how you do a post, just by changing the method name. And kind of tells you the data is appended for a get, just like this. You'll see this up in your address bar if you're doing get. If you're doing post, you don't see this. Okay? It's preferred for sensitive data like passwords, credit card numbers, etc. Right? All right. All right, styling forms. There's a lot you can do for styling, obviously. Okay. Let's look at, back to our restaurant one we looked at from the beginning here. So I just want to show you a few of these in action here. So another thing, I guess I did not mention, let's go back here. So here, if I want to put this input, so if I want to put required here, this is another one of those where it doesn't have a equal sign in the value, okay? It's a special kind of one, just like we'd seen the selected one, right? When we did those select and those options, we used selected. Here's one for required. This makes that input field required, right? So by doing that, okay, I'm going to save this. And we're going to run this again. So if I come down here and I try to hit a submit here, it's going to go right here. It's going to say, please fill this out. Okay. If I didn't put that required there, it wouldn't do that. Okay. It would, and you know, it's going to know that which ones are required, and it's going to stop and it's going to go to the first one that's required that you haven't filled out, right? I actually, when I built this, I had required on everything, but I got rid of them just to kind of show you, okay? So that's that first one here. If I come down here and hit submit now, and as you can see up here in the thing, it didn't really go anywhere, but this is what it looks like, right? This is what it looks like. It has a guest name, right? Email, everything else is empty because I didn't provide any information. The only thing I really provided was Jim. But here's your guest name, which is that name attribute. So you got name value pairs. Name is guest name, value Jim, because I put a Jim in there. Email, since you don't have any, it's not going to have anything in there. And then you're going to have a phone, nothing in there, etc., right? Because I didn't put any data in there. But if you want them to be required, you add required and it's going to stop. So let's just go ahead and add another one real quick so you can see how that works. And I'm going to add that one right there, and we're going to save that. We're going to run that again. And so the first one, I'll put my name in here. Actually, let me not even do that. Let's just go down here, hit submit. It's going to go back to there. Okay, now I'm going to enter my name. Now I'm going to hit submit again. It's going to go to the next one because this one's required, right? And then obviously if I set it, same thing, it's going to go ahead and show it up here because this is a get. Let's do it using a get, okay? And so it's going to put everything up here in the thing. First one's Jim, and here's my test email. I'll talk to you about this. These are kind of escape characters for like your for your @ sign, right? This is how it handles things like that because it can't actually put an @ sign in there. Because it can cause just some problems with how it works. Easiest way for me to say that for now, but we'll talk about that more in the future. But so that's how that kind of works by making something required, okay? And it's going to come back to that field if you don't have it there. Here is using the date function here. So let's just look at that real quick. Here we go. Pulled up the wrong thing. Actually, let's do this so we can look at them both at the same time real quick. All right. So okay, so that was reservation details. So we do an input type date. Okay, and then that's going to be. When you use date, it's automatically going to provide this nice little calendar. So I always like to date myself talking about in the past. So a long time ago, you couldn't do this, right? These were not, we had, basically you had text fields, you had radio buttons, you had check boxes. You only had a handful of different things. You didn't have special ones for email or password, even password. Password, you'd have to put in a text box and you have to do some special programming around it. Things are a lot easier nowadays, right? There's a lot of built-in functionality. Didn't have the required stuff either, right? So there's a lot of functionality that's there for you to use, and it's great. Makes life a lot easier. We used to have to do all this stuff when we went on a calendar. We had to build a calendar, push a button to bring up a calendar. You select it. We had to do all kinds of programming around that to make that work, right? Now it's out of the box, right? Right out of the box, you can do that. Select it, preferred time, right? Party size, just showing you, you know, this is one that wasn't around forever, you know, a long time ago either. You just do these little arrows for selecting how many. Preferences, that's just a drop down, right? No preference. Other one here is this. So always remember, check boxes can have more than one, right? Radio buttons. What happened to my little reset button? I don't know. Probably changed the name of it. I'll have to look at that here in a second. I thought it had a, maybe it didn't have a reset button. I'll have to look at it. All right. So, but remember, check boxes, you can enter more than one. And remember, when you, for that, you need to make sure that you've got a unique name to send to that back end, right? For radio buttons, you only can choose one if you programmed it right. If you don't have those grouped together correctly, the radio buttons, it might treat them as separate out, okay? But if you have a radio button group, then it's only going to allow you to choose one. And so that way you can have the same name on each one of these, and it's just going to send a value, right? It send a value of occasion, birthday, occasion, anniversary would be your value. You know, maybe occasion, meeting, you know, whatever. Okay. Thought I had a reset button here. I don't know. Let's see what happened. Let's go ahead and what do I do here? All right. I don't know what I'm doing here on that. I don't know what happened there. So here I'm just going to do reset. We'll leave that. Let's run this again. Forget about the little squigglies. All right, let's see if this actually worked. I'm going to choose that one, choose that. If I hit reset here, yeah. So reset's going to reset your whole form. Everything you put in here, anything you put in here, right? Hit the reset button, it's going to reset your form. Obviously, we know what the submit button does. So, all right, I think we spent a lot of time on this. I will let me know if you have any questions about any of this. We probably went way beyond what you're going to need for some of the basic assignments for this chapter. We are going to have a homework assignment for both tables and forms, and I'm going to actually do a helper video on each one of those for you, because you know there's some things that the book might not have covered everything needed really for you to do those. So I'm going to do a separate helper video for each one of those. So please let me know if you have any questions, and have a great day.